Welcome to Fluentora Podcast. Real speaking, real fluency.
Hello, and welcome to the Fluentora Podcast. I'm Emma.
And I'm Leo. Good to be back.
Leo, let me ask you something before we even name today's topic. Think of the last time someone truly annoyed you. Cut you off in traffic, sent a rude email, whatever it was. In that moment, who was actually in control of your peace of mind? You or them?
Honestly, in the moment, it felt like they were. My whole mood shifted because of something someone else did.
That's the honest answer most people would give. And it's exactly the question a philosophy born nearly 2,300 years ago was built to answer.
Go on.
Around 300 BCE, a merchant named Zeno was shipwrecked near Athens. He lost everything: his cargo, his money, essentially his entire livelihood, gone in one afternoon. With nothing left to do, he wandered into a bookshop, got absorbed in a book about Socrates, and ended up staying in Athens to study philosophy directly.
So the man who lost everything accidentally found the thing he'd be remembered for?
Exactly. He went on to found a school of thought at a public colonnade called the Stoa, which is where we get the word Stoicism.
And today, Stoic just means unbothered, calm, a bit emotionally flat even.
That's the popular meaning. But the actual philosophy is far more interesting and considerably more demanding than simply staying calm. Today, we're exploring what Stoicism actually claims, where it genuinely helps, and, importantly, where it might fail us.
I have opinions about that last part already.
I suspect you do. This is episode 10 for advanced learners, C1-C2. There's a free lesson plan to go with it at fluentora.com with the full reading, a persuasive writing exercise, and reflection questions.
Let's start with what this philosophy actually claims we control.
At the center of Stoic philosophy is one deceptively simple idea, most associated with the philosopher Epictetus, a former slave who became one of Rome's most influential teachers. He put it this way: it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters.
That sounds almost too simple to be a whole philosophy.
It sounds simple. Living by it is the demanding part. Epictetus divides the world into two categories: things within our control, our judgments, our choices, our responses, and things outside our control: other people's actions, the weather, the past, most outcomes. This is often called the dichotomy of control.
So the traffic that annoyed me earlier, outside my control. My reaction to it, inside my control?
Precisely. And Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who wrote privately to himself, never intending it for publication, captured the same idea even more sharply. He wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been."
That's a bold claim. Are they really saying an insult, a betrayal, genuinely can't harm you unless you decide it does?
That's exactly the claim, and I understand why it sounds almost provocative. The Stoic position is that events themselves are neutral. It's the judgment we layer on top of the event. Our interpretation, our story about what it means, that actually produces the suffering.
I want to come back to that claim later, because I think it's where this philosophy gets genuinely controversial. But let's stay with the framework for now.
There's a practical structure underneath all this, what the Stoics called the 4 cardinal virtues: practical wisdom, the ability to navigate a situation clearly and rationally; temperance, self-restraint, moderation; justice, treating others fairly, even when they haven't earned it; and courage, not just in dramatic moments, but in the daily discipline of facing ordinary difficulty with integrity.
So it's not just don't feel things. It's a whole framework for how to act well, given that you don't control outcomes.
That's the distinction people miss constantly. Seneca, another major Stoic voice, wrote something that speaks to why the just stay calm reading misses the point. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The claim isn't that bad things don't happen. It's that a significant portion of our suffering is manufactured by anticipation, interpretation, and story, not by the event itself.
Okay, I can accept that framework intellectually. But does it actually hold up under real pressure? Not a delayed train. Something that really matters?
Let's test it against something real.
Picture Elena, a project manager. She's spent 8 months chasing a single client, meetings, proposals, follow-ups, and today is the pitch. The client is finally seated across the table.
High stakes.
2 minutes before she's due to present, her laptop freezes completely. Not the keyboard, not a forced restart, nothing responds. The client is already seated, checking his phone. Someone's poured coffee that's now going cold at the edge of the table.
My stomach is tightening just hearing this.
And that's exactly the physiological response Elena has too. In the first 4 seconds, her mind runs a very familiar script. This is a disaster. This always happens to me. 8 months of work gone, right here in front of the one client who mattered most.
Which, frankly, is a completely understandable reaction.
Entirely understandable. And here's the Stoic move. Not suppressing that reaction, but noticing something specific about it. None of that internal story is factually wrong, and none of it is remotely useful either.
So there's a fact, the laptop has failed, and then there's a story stacked on top of it. This is a disaster, I'm cursed, it's over.
Exactly the distinction Marcus Aurelius trained himself to make 17 centuries earlier, under circumstances considerably worse than a frozen laptop. He wrote to himself constantly, during a plague, while leading military campaigns, refining exactly this skill. Separate the fact from the added story, and only the fact deserves your attention right now.
So what does Elena actually do? Noticing the distinction doesn't reboot the laptop.
No, and this is where the second discipline comes in, action. Once she's set the panic story aside, even imperfectly, she's free to ask a much more useful question. What can I actually do right now in this room? Apologize briefly, buy 60 seconds, pull up the presentation on her phone, ask to reschedule 10 minutes? Whatever is actually within her control in that moment.
The energy that would have gone into, why is this happening to me, gets redirected into, what's the next useful action?
Precisely. And the third discipline, acceptance, applies after she's done everything she reasonably can. If the pitch still goes badly despite her best effort, Marcus's framework says accept that outcome without resentment, because outcomes were never fully hers to control in the first place. Only the effort was.
Does the article say what actually happens to Elena? Does she save the pitch?
The article is more interesting than a tidy rescue. The client, we're told, ultimately chooses a competitor. The technique doesn't guarantee the outcome. That's rather the whole point. What it changes is what Elena does with the 4 seconds after the laptop freezes, not whether the universe cooperates with her afterward.
That's actually a more honest claim than most self-help versions of this idea make.
Which is exactly why Marcus Aurelius treated all of this as a trained skill, not a personality trait. Something you get better at through repetition, like a musician practicing scales, not something you either happen to have or don't.
You mentioned Marcus Aurelius was an emperor. That seems like an unusually powerful person to be writing private notes about accepting what he couldn't control. You'd think absolute power would insulate someone from exactly this kind of daily difficulty. The opposite was closer to true for him. He couldn't fire a difficult colleague or escalate a hard decision to someone above him. There was no one above him. Every problem, from plague to military crisis, stopped with him. For Marcus, this philosophy wasn't an intellectual hobby. It was closer to a survival requirement. That reframes the whole thing.
He wasn't writing from comfort. He was writing from necessity. And centuries later, those same private journals, never intended for anyone else to read, reportedly helped guide Nelson Mandela through 27 years of imprisonment.
A 20th century political prisoner finding steadiness in the private notebook of a 2nd century Roman emperor?
Which raises a genuinely interesting question. Why would that resonate so strongly across nearly 2,000 years and completely different circumstances? I'd argue it's because the core claim isn't culturally specific. The gap between what happens to us and how we respond exists whether you're facing a plague, a prison cell, or a frozen laptop. I'll add, Stoicism doesn't seem to be purely self-focused either, from what you've described. Wasn't there something about Seneca and enslaved people? Yes, and it's worth pausing on. At a time when Roman law treated enslaved people as property, Seneca argued for their humane treatment and insisted on a shared fundamental humanity. Given the norms of his era, that was a genuinely unusual position to hold publicly.
So this wasn't just manage your own emotions and ignore the world. There was an ethical dimension too.
Exactly. The idea was never passivity. The Stoic claim is closer to only someone who has genuinely cultivated self-control and virtue is actually positioned to bring meaningful, positive change to others. And this connects to something surprisingly modern. Epictetus' core idea that suffering stems from our judgments, not from events themselves, resonates strongly with modern psychology. Cognitive behavioral therapy is built on a nearly identical premise. Changing self-defeating interpretations changes emotional outcomes.
And I recall reading about Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived a concentration camp.
Yes, his logotherapy is rooted in a very Stoic principle, that we retain the capacity to find and create meaning even in circumstances that are otherwise unbearable and entirely outside our control.
So this idea keeps resurfacing. Ancient Greece, Rome, a South African prison cell, a psychiatrist after the Holocaust, modern therapy rooms.
Which is precisely why I don't think of this as a historical curiosity. It's a working framework that keeps getting rediscovered because the underlying human problem never goes away. But you said earlier you wanted to come back to something.
I did, because I think there's a real limit to this philosophy, and I want to test it properly. Let's test it.
Here's a scenario. A close friend has just lost their job. They're deeply upset, genuinely shaken. Another friend, who's been studying Stoicism, tells them, remember, it's not the event that's hurting you. It's your judgment about it. Reframe it, and the pain goes away. Emma, is that good advice? Or is that, honestly, a little cold?
I'll defend the Stoic position first, and then I genuinely want to hear you push back. The claim itself isn't wrong. Losing a job is a fact. My career is over, I'm worthless, I'll never recover is a story layered on top. And that story is very often what's actually driving the despair, more than the job loss itself. Reframing that story is not denial. It's arguably one of the fastest, most reliable ways to reduce unnecessary suffering.
Here's my problem with delivering that advice in the moment. It can feel dismissive, like the friend's pain isn't being taken seriously.
That's a fair challenge, and I don't think it's a small one.
And timing matters enormously here. Telling someone this 5 minutes after devastating news is very different from having this conversation 5 days later, once the initial shock has settled.
I think that's genuinely correct, and it points to something the philosophy itself doesn't always make explicit. Stoic reframing is a tool for after the initial wave of feeling has been allowed to exist, not a replacement for feeling it at all. Grief and shock have their own physiological timeline. They don't wait for permission from our judgment before flooding the body.
So can Stoic advice be true and still be the wrong thing to say in that specific moment?
Thoughtfully, I think it can, yes. Arguably, the content of the advice and the timing of the advice are two separate questions. and conflating them is where this goes wrong. The friend offering it may be philosophically correct and interpersonally tone-deaf at the very same moment.
Does closeness matter too? Would you accept this from your therapist differently than from a friend you've known for 2 years?
I suspect closeness cuts both ways. A close friend has more standing to say something difficult, but also more responsibility to read the room, to know whether this particular friend in this particular moment is ready to hear it.
So, is there a way to offer Stoic-style reframing that doesn't land as dismissive?
I'd guess it starts with validating the feeling first, explicitly. This genuinely is awful, and you're allowed to feel terrible about it, before ever introducing the idea that judgment shapes suffering. The sequence matters as much as the content.
After a pause, can I tell you where this actually gets interesting? A few days later, in this same scenario, the friend comes back and says something unexpected.
Go on.
They say that the reframing advice, once they'd actually had time to feel the initial shock, turned out to be exactly what helped them start moving forward. Not in the first 5 minutes, but by day 4 or 5, it became the thing that let them stop replaying the story and start job hunting again.
Which I think resolves this more honestly than either of us defending one side completely. The Stoic claim wasn't wrong, it was just delivered on the wrong day.
So maybe the real skill isn't just knowing the philosophy, it's knowing when a person is actually ready to hear it.
That might be the most Stoic conclusion of all. Recognizing what's within your control in that conversation isn't just your own judgment. It's also your judgment about someone else's readiness.
Arguably, we just demonstrated the entire debate in real time.
Actually, Leo, did you notice what you just said?
What do you mean?
You said arguably. And a few minutes ago, you said, I think that's genuinely correct, softening a claim rather than stating it as flat fact. We've been doing this the entire debate, both of us.
I hadn't even noticed.
Which is actually a perfect place to pause and name what we've both been doing instinctively.
Shifting to a teaching tone, still warm. At C1-C2 level, one of the clearest signs of real fluency isn't more vocabulary, it's how you handle disagreement. Skilled English speakers rarely state opinions as absolute, unqualified fact. Instead, they use what's called hedging language, phrases that let you sound genuinely confident while still leaving room for nuance.
Which we apparently just did without planning to.
Exactly. Let's name a few of them. Arguably, which you used, signals, I believe this, and I think there's solid reasoning behind it, but I'm not claiming it's beyond dispute. For example, arguably, the timing of advice matters as much as its content.
What about it could be argued that?
A slightly more formal version of the same move, often used to introduce a position you may not fully hold yourself on, but want to represent fairly. It could be argued that Stoic advice places too much responsibility on the grieving person.
And I notice you used something like, while X has merit earlier, when you conceded my point about timing.
Precisely. Right, while deliberate reframing has real value for everyday frustration, it could be argued that treating it as a universal solution risks overlooking reactions that were never fully within someone's control. Notice the shape. Acknowledge the strength of one position, then introduce the limitation.
What's the phrase for directly correcting a misreading, without sounding harsh?
This is not to say that, but rather, it lets you close off a wrong interpretation of your point without dismissing the person who raised it. For example, this is not to say the Stoic position is worthless, but rather that its usefulness may depend on the size and suddenness of what's happened.
So, arguably, and it could be argued that, for introducing a claim with appropriate confidence, while X has merit for conceding ground gracefully, and this is not to say but rather for correcting a misreading without dismissing the other person.
Warmly. All 4 are in your free lesson plan, along with a full model paragraph and an exercise where you identify and count the hedging phrases used. It's a genuinely useful skill, in professional negotiations, written feedback, and exactly the kind of debate we just had.
It's strange. We needed the philosophy to disagree productively and the language to disagree gracefully.
Which might be the whole point of both.
A few questions for you now. Take real time with these. Full, extended answers, not quick reactions.
These come directly from your free lesson plan if you want to develop your thinking further afterwards.
Question 1. Think of a time something suddenly went wrong. A mistake, an accident, unexpected bad news. How did your mind and body react in the first few seconds? Looking back now, how much of what followed was the event itself, and how much was the story you added on top of it?
Question 2. Think of someone you know, or someone in public life, known for staying calm under real pressure. What do they actually do differently from people who panic? Is it the absence of fear, or something else entirely?
Question 3. Is calm always the right response to a difficult situation? Can you think of a moment where staying calm might actually have been the wrong choice?
Question 4, and this one's personal. Have you ever been on either side of the empathy dilemma? Either receiving advice to just reframe it during a hard moment, or being the one offering that advice to someone else? How did it land? And would you do anything differently now?
These are genuinely rich questions to sit with. The kind worth developing into the persuasive paragraph in your lesson plan, using the hedging language we just practiced.
So, Emma, after all of this, what's the one thing you'd actually want someone to take away?
That the space between what happens to you and how you respond is real. And it's the only place any of us ever actually have freedom. Not the absence of feeling, not suppressing pain, just a small, trainable gap where a choice becomes possible.
And maybe knowing that the philosophy is true doesn't excuse you from also knowing when to say it.
That might be the most important addition either of us made to 2,000-year-old wisdom today. Thank you for thinking this through with us.
And for practicing some genuinely advanced English while you did it.
Download your free Space Between lesson plan at Fluentora.com. The full reading, the persuasive writing exercise, and space to develop your own answers to today's questions.
If you'd like to debate these ideas out loud with a real teacher, book a free trial lesson at Fluentora.com. Nuanced disagreement is exactly the kind of speaking practice that builds real fluency.
And tell us in the comments, where do you land on the empathy dilemma? We read every comment.
Please subscribe and share this with someone who thinks deeply about how they respond to difficulty.
Speak fluent English. Build a confident tomorrow. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for watching.